Hi, this is Robert with Cruzbike, and today we're going to be building the latest edition of the complete Cruzbike S40. First step, of course, is always unpacking everything from your box and setting it aside. All right, let's take inventory of what we have here. All right, so we have our parts box and our wheels out of the box, also our seat and our seat pad, headrest pad tubes. The whole bike then will lift out once everything else is out of the box. Do a nice wrapped package just like this. All right, now all that remains is to get all of our wrapping off, but the first thing let's do is let's take a look at what's in our parts box here. Make sure we have inventory of all the things we're going to need to do our build. So we have the seat extension. We'll set that there with our seat. We also have our pedals and set those aside for now. In the box, we also have a complimentary rear view mirror for the handlebars. Here we have, it looks like a little door handle, but it's actually the yoke that attaches the back of the seat around the frame. So we'll set that aside with our seat and seat extension. We have our chain. We'll set that aside. Our quick link is in a different bag, which is right here, and in there we also have a spare derailleur hanger and derailleur hanger bolt. And we're going to go over all of this little hardware stuff here in just a moment to fish out the things we need versus the stuff that's actually spare parts. And here we have another small hardware package. We're going to go over that here in just a little bit more detail. Okay, so in the hardware package we have a bunch of bolts and also a pulley, and here we're going to match it up with our spare derailleur hanger and the small bolt for the derailleur hanger that holds that to the chainstay. We're going to set that aside. And in our package we also have our quick link. We're going to set that over here because we're going to need that later. Now the pulley and the small bushing and the larger M6 bolt that has the thread lock on it, we're going to set those aside. Those go on the front derailleur stock, which is an option, and we're not going to need those for the complete bike. So we also have these 4 M5 button head bolts. We have 2 larger washers, and we have 4 M5 nylock nuts. Now these are the hardware for the seat. So we take this with the yoke. We have 2 bolts and 2 washers and 2 nuts for the bottom of the seat, but for the yoke we only need the bolts. So we can take 2 nylock nuts out and we can put those in our spare parts bag along with the other parts here. And once we've set that aside or set that in our spare parts, we will be looking at the only hardware that we need to actually do the assembly of the complete S40. All right, now that we have all those parts sorted out, we can work on removing all of the remaining protective wrap from all of our small parts like the headrest tubes here and the frame, and hopefully it goes as smoothly as it does for me. All right, once we have all of our wrapping off, let's take a closer look here at our S40. We'll notice our rear through axle is already in the frame. We're going to leave that there for the moment. Our Perez clamp, which holds the headrest tubes, is in place and nice and snug in the frame. They're the gorgeous moss green paint on this 2022-2023 S40. Here we have our front through axle. Now note, we're going to pull the tool out. It could be in the rear, but this one is in the front axle. We're going to take that out and set it aside, because the through axle will not go in or out without the tool being removed. And then here we have our chainstay pre-assembled with our bolts. Notice there's a gap. We have a nice small gap front and back. The chainstay is not snug at the moment, but when we tighten it, we want to have a gap here. We don't want to tighten these bolts so tight that these surfaces touch. This is very important. I'll be going over that again when we do the assembly. Also, we have our pivot clamp, bolt, and washers are already installed. We're going to need to remove those, but take note where you have 2 washers on the sleeve side and 1 washer on the bolt side. So once we remove this, when we do our assembly of our front end, we'll go over that again, but very important to note that 2 washers on one side, 1 washer on the other. And then there we have our boom, handlebars, everything's all cabled, and we're ready to go. All right, note on the Perez clamp that it's nice and snug up against the frame. And when you loosen those panhead bolts here and here, it lowers the Perez clamp. That's how we get the headrest tubes into the frame. We'll go over that when we put the seat on. All right, a few other things we're going to need. I like to put grease on the threads, so I use White Lightning clear grease. Any grease that you have will work. Any bike or bolt grease you have is fine. It just is nice just to not have those bolts seize up if you live in a humid area or something like that. So it's a good thing to have some bike grease on hand. And here we have our Cruzbike toolkit. And in here we have all the Allen wrenches and small tools that we're going to need to complete our assembly. All right, the last item we're going to use for our assembly is our wheel stand. That'll help us out quite a bit. And also we're going to need a nice hot cup of coffee. So we're going to build a complete S40 over 1 cup of hot coffee. So once we have that all set and ready to go, now we're truly ready. Got our coffee, got our tools, got our wheel stand, got our parts, got our bike all cleaned off of packing material and ready to go. And the first thing, we're going to protect the back end. If you're doing it on a carpeted surface or something like that, that's great, but I highly recommend just protecting the back end. We're going to be working on the front end mainly, so I just want to prevent scratching up the paint on the dropouts. The first thing we're going to focus on here is tying together this front triangle. We're going to take our front through axle out. Now note, they've already pre-greased these from the factory, so there's already a little grease on the threads. That's good. We're going to set this aside. We want to make sure we keep our through axles nice and clean at all times. And once we have our through axle out and handy, we're going to take our drive wheel and we're going to put it in the wheel stand. The cassette always goes to the right side. And now we're going to remove our pivot bolt for the pivot clamp. We have the slide bolt and the bolt. We're going to take this out and have it nice and handy. Now, this is not greased from the factory, so we're going to add a little bit of grease to the shaft of this sleeve bolt here. That'll make the likelihood of creaking or binding a lot less. Now note, we also have this small bolt. This is our derailleur bolt, so it's a small 2.5 millimeter Allen, which should be in your Cruzbike toolkit. We're going to take that bolt out. And once we have that bolt out, we're going to be able to install our rear derailleur. Now, we're going to make that process a lot easier by undoing the cable at the bottom of the fork. That'll give us a little more slack to work with. So we're just going to pull down on the housing and we're going to slide this cable out of the stop. Once we have that out, we're going to have a lot more room to play with. I'm going to take our rear derailleur like this. The hanger is already installed. And all we have to do is maneuver our derailleur hanger right into the chainstay, like so, and then install the hanger onto the chainstay with our small bolt and the 2.5 Allen. And we want to make sure that this is nice and snug. Once we have that in there, our front chainstay is ready to install on the front end. Okay, now that we have the derailleur installed, we're going to take the entire unit. We're going to very carefully lift this up. This is why I added that protection to the back of the frame there. Now note the headset feels really stiff. See that? It's very stiff. That's the viscoset doing its job. So it's not over tightened or anything like that. That's the proper way it should feel. It feels a lot stiffer when it's just your hand turning the fork. So we're going to set the fork down onto the wheel, and then we're going to gather our front end. We're going to make sure our cable is passing underneath and in between the pivot clamp. And then we're going to take our nice little pivot clamp bolt. The sleeve side, we have 2 washers on the outside. And then on the bolt, we have 1 washer on the bolt. And we're just going to hand thread this in just 2, 3, or 4 turns for now, just so everything kind of stays put. Then we're going to maneuver our through axle through the front chainstay, through the fork. You might have to lift up on the wheel just a little bit, but it should slide nice and easy all the way through the hub and through the other side, and you should be able to hand tighten it. And then we're going to use our little tool to finish tightening it. We're not going to tighten it quite all the way yet, but just give it a little teeny bit so it stays put. Now, in order to straighten out our slider, we're going to get a 5mm Allen, and we're going to loosen the boom clamp. We're going to loosen this. Now, I like to set this at 15. So the numbers there along the boom, we're going to put that at 15, and the slider we're also going to put at 15. That's going to give us a good baseline. Now we're going to also straighten out this top clamp so it's nice and level. That'll make sure our handlebars are level. And once we've kind of eyeballed that, then we can tighten down our boom clamp again with the 5mm Allen. And then we can use the 6mm or the tool to tighten the through axle. And then we use 2 5mm Allens to tighten the pivot bolt clamp down on both sides. Now all of these adjustments are things you'll have to loosen later when you do a fit. So if you see our fit videos, that'll go over those adjustments. Making sure this is all nice and snug now will just kind of help our assembly, even though later we'll be making other adjustments and loosening those. Now the chainstay clamps, I mentioned this before at the start of the video. We're going to use a 4mm Allen to snug these down. They only need to be about 1/4 of a turn or so past snug, with a gap on the top and the bottom. They don't need to be super tight. The clamps will break if you over tighten them. All right, let's move on to the handlebar. So we're going to take our 4mm Allen and we're going to undo our handlebar clamp bolts. I like to just hold them like this in my hand. Now I'm going to put a little bit of grease on all of these threads. They're not greased from the factory, so we're going to add a little bit of grease there, just a small amount. We will position our handlebars, and we will reattach our clamps one at a time. Now, similar to the chainstay clamps, you want to have a gap top and bottom. They should be evenly spaced on each side, top and bottom. And later in the fit videos, you can see a more proper alignment of the handlebars. For now, we're just going to make them nice and snug, route our cables, and there you go. Your handlebars and front end is installed. Now we can move on to the rear wheel. We're going to take our protection off that we have here. And our through axle simply comes out. Again, this one is pre-greased from the factory, so that's nice. We're going to simply slide the rear wheel in, get that rotor in between the pads, insert our through axle, tighten that down, and then this one we can tighten down with the tool. And once you've done that, your rear wheel installation is complete. Once that axle is all nice and tight, with our tool, we can simply stash this tool inside the through axle and go in the rear or the front and just push that all the way in, and it's always handy. All right, next up, let's get our seat installed. It's starting to come together. And we have the extension goes on top of the seat like this. Kind of adds a little bit extra material for you to sit on. I like mine extended all the way forward for the larger posterior. So we simply add the washers and bolts to the seat extension. Very important to make sure the washers are here. And then the extension will go on top of the seat. And I like to just hold these bolts with two hands, just like this. And just position these bolts right through the holes on the small tabs that are welded to the frame. And if you keep it tilted forward so the Velcro doesn't catch on the back, you can get those bolts through the holes nice and easy. And then you can simply lay the seat back and line up the two holes for the Perez clamp right there. Line them up right over the bolt heads, nice and center, and your seat will be pretty much dead center, allowing you to put the two nylock nuts on the underside. And when you tighten these nylock nuts, we'll use our little wrench, a little 8mm wrench, and an M3, a 3mm Allen. And these only need to be tightened down so that the thing doesn't move. So you don't need to put a whole lot of torque on these. Just make sure that the nylock nut is engaged, and that's plenty tight. Now we have our seat yoke, which we'll add a little grease to these last two bolts. And we're going to line up the lower holes with the yoke on the underside of the frame. I like to line up one and just thread it in a couple times, and then line up the second one. Thread it in a couple times, and then we're going to evenly tighten these down. Now again, you just want to tighten this down until the Velcro is engaged and it's nice and snug, and that the seat is not creaking or moving back and forth. Hand tight is plenty tight on these two bolts. Even with this small wrench, we're only going to tighten them down by hand, just so much that the seat doesn't necessarily creak or move all over the place. Everything's nice and secure with the seat. Now for the Perez clamp, we can loosen these one at a time. I like to do each one a little bit at a time so it's evenly lowering the pivot clamp. Now if you put your fingers in this hole, you can feel the Perez clamp lowering. And if we undo these bolts enough, the Perez clamp will be lowered all the way to the bottom of the frame. So you can feel it with your fingers. So once we have these loosened all the way, that will allow us to slide the headrest tubes into the frame. Now if you don't use the headrest, the S40 is a good capable bike without a headrest, but if you need the headrest, you need to lower the Perez clamp. You can also cut these tubes depending on how far in you need to slide your headrest. But the headrest will simply slide in a little bit of work into the frame, just like this. You make your adjustments, which you can do later. Please see our fit video for those. And then we tighten the Perez clamp again, just hand tight, just to put enough pressure on the tubes to keep them from sliding around. And there you have the seat and headrest assembly. All right, our coffee is almost complete. That means we're getting near the end. So let's tackle the drivetrain. Okay, so earlier we let the cable out of the cable stop when we put our front chainstay together. So now we're going to reinstall these cables into the stops on the fork, the lower one and the top one. Very easy. We're simply going to install the top one first. Make sure we have no binding anywhere. And then the lower one, we're going to pull down. We don't want to kink the cable, but we're just going to pull down on that and then insert the cable into the housing. Now once we've done that, we can unpack our chain. And this chain's pretty greasy from the factory, nice and lubed, so I'm going to don a pair of gloves here to make this a cleaner process. Now we have our chain, and we're also going to want our quick link at the ready. Okay, very easy way to route the chain. We're going to simply drop the chain around the back part of the cassette, just like so, and we're going to have it resting on the smallest cog because that's where our derailleur should be lined up with. The derailleur is set pretty nice from the factory. So once we have that, you see this tab, we have a tab inside the hanger. In the derailleur cage, we have a little tab that we need to avoid. So we're going to pull the cage forward and we're going to drop the chain over the jockey wheel, just like that. And then we're going to hold the cage with our left hand and we're going to bring the chain up underneath the other jockey wheel and around the other small bracket on the back. You can let that back down and let it hang. Now we have a nice properly routed chain through the derailleur. Now that we have that, we're going to take our quick link and have our quick link at the ready. And we're going to simply pull this chain in reverse back around through the derailleur, around the cassette. We're going to attach our quick link. Now we have our quick link is at the top part of our chain. This is a little different than we've done it in the past, but it's an easier way to do it. Now we're going to put our chain on the chain ring. Note that the chain ring is a narrow wide, so the chain only fits one way. So once our chain is seated on the ring, our quick link is on the top. We're going to add pressure to the crank. And once we do that, you will see the quick link pop closed just like that. And there we have our chain installation. All right, now we have our pedals. If you note on the inside of each one is a small R. That pedal is going to go on the right side. and the other pedal has a small L on the inside. You can see it right there, and that pedal goes on the left side. So again, we're going to grease these threads on the pedals. Now these ones don't have any flats for a wrench, but they do have an Allen on the inside. So in your kit is an 8mm Allen wrench. That's going to be the Allen wrench we use to do the install of the pedals. So remember, the right on the right and the left on the left. When you back pedal is when the pedals will thread in and then finish it off with the wrench. We don't need any pedal washers here. Pedal washers are generally for carbon cranks. So we're going to make sure our pedals are nice and snug, and then we're finished with that step. All right, that brings us to our seat pad and headrest pad. We have our Velcro. I like to do the lower Velcro first and then the top Velcro at the end. We're going to simply remove the backing from our sticky Velcro. Now this stuff will not come off. Once you put it on, you get one shot at this. So I put the Velcro on the pad, line up the front of the pad with the very front of the seat extension, and then give it a nice press down. Then you're going to repeat the same thing with the Velcro in the middle of the seat pad and the top of the seat pad. I'm going to remove our sticky material from the Velcro, stick that back on the seat, and that concludes the seat pad installation. And then the headrest cushion has Velcro straps, and it simply slides over the tubes, and there's a small pocket at the top. All right, and you have successfully completed building an S40 over 1 cup of coffee. Looks like I'm fresh out of coffee, so it's about time for me to fly to get more. All right, well, I'm out. If you have questions, please feel free to email us at support@cruzbike.com. Please check out our other vids for fit and adjustment, and happy riding.